Erev Tov, here we are, Monday night, Erev, Erev Pesach, and feels close at hand. We're turning over the kitchen tonight. Hope everybody else is moving along in whatever preparations are on your mind or on your to-do list. And we stay with Parshat Shmini for 2 weeks, the bulk of which is Pesach. But we started laning it at Shabbos Mincha and this morning, and we will see it again this coming Shabbos Chol HaMoed at Mincha, and then again a week from Shabbos when we lane it on Shabbat morning. So it sort of sandwiches Pesach in its midst, Parshat Shmini. Um, and we're going to look at the fourth and final of Rabbi Golden's essays on Shmini. He deals with the death of Nadav and Avihu, obviously a seminal event in biblical history and in theology that a lot of Torah narratives and laws feel in conversation with. And he's going to address a topic towards the end of the Parsha, which is the laws of kashrut. It's as we've already started to see from Rabbi Golden, it's a survey without getting too in depth into any position, but gives us a little flavor, no pun intended, of approaches to kashrut. I just was looking at a beautiful essay on the Torah.com that tries to offer some explanation for the animals that are kosher and non-kosher. Um, One that actually dovetails with the Shabbat Hagadol drasha, connecting it to animals that don't consume animals that have blood. Now, you might say, don't all animals have blood? But in the Torah, fish and insects are not really treated as animals whose blood we have to be concerned about. And so, um, we don't salt fish or insects. We consume them with their blood, so to speak. And so the discussion comes up, broadly speaking, just by way of introduction. We'll see very little of this in Rabbi Golden, but one of the classic analyses of the animals which are kosher are vegetarian animals or animals that are non-carnivorous or non-predatory. And people have pointed out that ducks eat fish and other things like that. And so they are, you know, but they are kosher. They don't seem to follow that parameter. So this author argues that because the things that ducks consume are not what the Torah considers blooded, the real parameter is not eating things that are considered blooded. So relates to the discussion of blood from the Shabbat Hagadol drasha. Um, so I thought that was interesting. We're going to dive in and see what Rabbi Golden has to say to us about the laws of kashrut. Not a terribly long essay, and I don't think anyone will mind ending a few minutes early in this busy time. Uh, Children's rooms are still being cleaned at this hour in our house. So by the children, the two older children, I should say. Um, okay, here we go. As Parshat Shmini draws to a close, this is our context. The Torah abruptly turns its attention to a set of laws that fall into the halachic category popularly known as kashrut. Right? We might wonder, what does he mean by that? And in the footnote, he notes the word kosher simply means fit and does not apply only to permitted foods, but can, of course, be used in reference to other items such as mezuzot, tefillin, and even articles that do not fall into the category of mitzvot. The use of the term specifically as a general heading for permitted foods is thus popular usage, right? So kosher is not a category that applies exclusively to food, but we typically think about kashrut in the context in our common parlance as relating to food, hence his use of popularly known as kashrut. The text delineates, among other laws, the categories of animals, fish, and fowl that are halachically permitted or prohibited for consumption. To be kosher, an animal must possess split hooves and chew its cud, while a fish must possess both fins and scales. Prohibited birds are listed individually in the text without the delineation of defining characteristics. After outlining a series of additional regulations, Parshat Shmini ends with the broad exhortation: "For I am the Lord your God, and you shall sanctify yourselves, and you shall be holy, for I am holy." For I am the Lord your God who raises you from the land of Egypt in order to be for you a God, and you shall be holy, for I am holy. This is the law of the animal and the bird and all living creature that swarms in the water, and for every creature that teems on the ground. Distinguish between the impure and the pure, and between the creature that may be eaten and the creature that may not be eaten. Here are our questions. Is there any logical rhyme or reason to these laws of kashrut which occupy such a critical, prominent place in the life of every observant Jew? I was just speaking to somebody today about parameters for conversion for a minor who has a Jewish father. And amongst the range of standards for conversion, there is amongst the most permissive. We generally adopt looser standards or different kinds of standards for converting a child than an adult. And where there is Jewish parentage, a Jewish father called Zera Yisrael, we already will take an even more permissive approach in order to um, uh, firm up the Jewish halachic identity of the child. And found myself saying, kashrut needs to be observed at some level in the home. Certainly, non-kosher meat should not be consumed. And then you pause and say, like, why is this a foundational element of Jewish life? If we want to establish some sense of rich Jewish identity or basic Jewish identity, why is this near the top of the list, right? And that's part of his question. Is there any logical rhyme or reason to these laws of kashrut which occupy such a critical, prominent place in the life of every observant Jew? Why does the Torah append these laws in seemingly arbitrary fashion to the end of Parshat Shmini? Does the placement of these regulations provide a hint towards their significance? Before answering these questions, two general observations must be made. A. The laws of kashrut do not emerge from the biblical text monolithically. In addition to the regulations before us, numerous strictures recorded in various passages in the Torah play a role in determining the status of specific foodstuffs. These restrictions are further expanded upon through rabbinic legislation. Parameters found in the Torah include, but are not limited to, meaning this is his way of pointing out, this isn't the beginning and end of the story of permitted and forbidden foods, this section in the end of Parshat Shmini. We have all kinds of other ones in other places, and they include the bans on the consumption of blood and forbidden fats of even kosher animals, the ban on the consumption of the sciatic nerve of a kosher animal, the prohibitions concerning the cooking of a mixture of kosher meat and milk, the consumption of such a cooked mixture, and the derivation of benefit from such a cooked mixture, some of which are, of course, rabbinic expansions on the biblical prohibition. The requirement for the proper slaughter of a kosher animal, the ban on wine that had been used for idolatrous purposes. In isolated cases, the Torah does provide historical or ethical rationales for the laws in question. On the whole, however, the text is conspicuously silent. So we have a raft of, guidelines around eating, and we don't get a lot of explanation by and large for them. Due to the Torah's silence, this is the second introductory point, most specific laws of kashrut fall into the legal category of chukim, laws for which no reason is given in the Torah text. You may recall, if I can quickly find it, that in our discussion in Parshat Vayikra of Korbanot, Rabbi Golden opened up by bringing the opinion of the Mishnah Torah before getting to the Moreh Nevuchim, the God of the Perplexed. But the Mishnah Torah, in which he writes, the Rambam categorizes Korbanot as chukim, mitzvot for which no reason is given in the Torah. Okay, so we started off this book of Vayikra with chukim. Now we're in Parshat Shmini, and we encounter another mitzvah, which he argues most people will say is also a chok, a law for which no reason is given in the Torah text. Faced with the challenges presented by chukim in general, the rabbis debate whether or not one is allowed to posit potential reasons for these seemingly reasonless regulations. He treats this topic elsewhere and writes, for a full discussion of this and other issues surrounding chukim, see Shmot Teruma 3. Again, we picked up with Rabbi Golden and Vayikra. Maybe another year we'll go through Shmot or Breshit. And there he discusses the question of, if something doesn't have a reason, are you allowed? What are the pros and cons of attempting to supply a reason? But broadly speaking, kashrut seems to be a chok. In this study, we will adopt the position that one is allowed to suggest reasons for specific chukim, as we sample some of the suggested interpretations for the practical yet enigmatic laws that close Parshat Shmini. And here they are. Approach A. In her opening comments on this section, Nechama Leibowitz distinguishes between the Torah's regulations concerning permitted/prohibited food sources and seemingly similar laws found in other ancient cultures. While other traditions demonize the forbidden creatures themselves, seeing them as representing forces contrary to God's will, no such value judgments are rendered in Jewish law. The halachic ban on specific food sources is simply that, a restriction on human behavior. The animals designated as forbidden within the Torah are not inherently evil. They are simply forbidden for consumption by Jews. This distinction mirrors the much greater divide between superstitious and religious practice, between belief in arbitrary, dangerous forces vying for governance of the world, and loyalty to a unified thinking God who makes demands upon human behavior. Going all the way back to Breshit, see Breshit Essay 3 for a full analysis of this distinction, which traces back to the Garden of Eden. That would be fascinating to look at, especially because I think superstitious practice and belief in arbitrary and dangerous forces creep back into Judaism in all sorts of ways and places, even if that's not the fundamental direction that the Torah is steering us in religiously and theologically. Um, Folk religion always finds its way. But broadly speaking, okay, this is, an ordered, rational approach to the world. Animals aren't divided into categories of good and evil. There are just animals we're allowed to eat and animals we're not allowed to eat. In light of Leibowitz's observations, however, our primary question gains even greater traction. If the creatures forbidden by the Torah are not inherently evil, why would God prohibit their consumption? Right? So this, articulating that this is a chok and that there's nothing fundamental that distinguishes between prohibited and permitted animals from a kashrut perspective just deepens the question of it seems extra arbitrary. What is there any basis for the differentiation if it's not about the nature of the animals? A number of prominent classical scholars, including the Rambam, the Ramban, and the Baal HaChinuch, all medieval commentaries, maintain that the foods prohibited by the Torah are physically injurious to human health. If this is a quote from the Sefer HaChinuch, if there are some among these foods, argues the Baal HaChinuch, whose potential for harm is known neither to us nor to medical scholars, do not be concerned. The true physician, that's God, who warned us of them, is wiser than you or they, right? So some examples may be obvious to some why they are unhealthy. I don't know, what examples might be, but if you find other animals or prohibited things which you can't explain why they're unhealthy, you just leave that to God. God knows that they're unhealthy. Even the Rashbam, staunch defender of textual pshat, offers this health-based explanation as the literal interpretation of the text and as a response to heretics. Other authorities, however, vehemently oppose the notion that the laws of kashrut could possibly be based upon health concerns. Heaven forbid that I should believe so, claims the Abravanel, as he raises three primary objections to health-based explanations for the laws of kashrut. 1. Such interpretations reduce the stature of Torah by lowering it to the level of a simple medical tome. 2. The foods prohibited by Jewish law are regularly consumed by non-Jews to no adverse physical effect. 3. Countless other dangerous substances abound in our environment, yet are not included in the Torah's list of forbidden foods. All good arguments. In the face of these and other arguments, a number of scholars shift the focus of concern. The foodstuffs prohibited by the Torah, they maintain, are indeed potentially damaging to man. The threat posed by these substances, however, plays out in the spiritual rather than in the physical realm. As the Abravanel clearly states, through the ban on specific foods, the Torah does not seek to heal the bodies of man, nor to ensure their physical well-being, but rather to safeguard the health of the soul and to cure its infirmities. The text, therefore, bans those foods which defile and desecrate man's pure soul, creating in him an evil disposition, giving rise to a spirit of impurity, desecrating both thought and action. Again, we don't know exactly what those parameters are or how, how they manifest, but somehow it's not about physical health, but it's about some defilement or impurity that comes from a certain set of animals, yet again, even without trying to categorize them as good and evil. One by one, with minor variations, commentaries such as the Sforno and the Kli Yakar fall in line with this approach. The creatures prohibited for their consumption by Torah law, they maintain, all share one common feature. Their ingestion as food somehow damages man's moral fiber and spiritual fabric. Even the Ramban, who is willing to accept the idea that forbidden animals are damaging to man's health, nonetheless sees spiritual danger as a primary motive for prohibiting their consumption. Ramban is one example, as we spoke about at the beginning, who seems to connect the lists of prohibited and permitted animals to whether they are predatory or not, and seems to adopt the idea that ingesting predators is spiritually harmful for us. Building on the notion that the substances forbidden by the Torah are injurious to man's spiritual welfare, and again, we can go again beyond just the question of kosher and non-kosher animals, but to other things that were talked about in the list: blood, fats, you know, things that were part of idolatrous practice, things like that. In order to understand the textual flow, this scholar maintains we must return to the book of Shmot, to the sin of the golden calf. There, in the very shadow of Sinai, we find that God withdraws from God's people in response to their overwhelming failure. We spent a lot of time with Dr. Brachi Elitzur in the book of Shmot, analyzing God's presence, God's departure, Moshe's arguments with God about this. The Israelites become a nation bereft, unable to relate to their God directly, as they did before their sin. In the course of his prayers, however, Moshe discerns the mechanisms through which the Israelites can once again achieve direct communion with the divine. The Mishkan, its utensils, priestly servants, and sanctified offerings will draw God back into the midst of God's people. A journey of reconciliation thus begins, framed by God's detailed commandments concerning the construction and operation of the Mishkan. The nation's ready response, this bears some similarity to Dr. Elitzur's analysis, where the eagerness of the people is part of what convinces God to come back and inhabit the Mishkan, which they're just not even sure is going to pan out or not. The building of the Mishkan, the transmission of the laws of the Korbanot, the preparations for the investiture of the Kahuna, and the launching of the sanctuary service. These are all steps of the journey of reconciliation. In the opening segments of Parshat Shmini, this transformative process reaches its dramatic climax as the Kohanim enter their sanctified role and a heavenly fire consumes the offerings upon the altar, right? Entering their sanctified role happened this past week's Parsha and Parshat Tzav, culminating on day 8, hence the name of Parshat Shmini, the 8th day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, early on in the Parsha, in which the heavenly fire comes down, and that's the manifestation of God's presence, and that's the restoration of God's presence, which has been absent since the golden calf, and its return has been in question. Suddenly, these events are tragically marred by the violent death of Nadav and Avihu at God's hand. Moshe's goal, however, has been achieved. God has returned to God's people. Noting this success, Moshe now moves to prepare the Israelites for God's constant presence in their lives. He commands them to consume only those foods that will enable them to bask in the light of eternal life, and he instructs them to refrain from ingesting those substances that would impede their spiritual growth. Through the eyes of the Sforno, the Torah laws concerning permitted and prohibited foodstuffs are transformed from technical regulations into an essential component in the dramatic reconciliation between God and God's people. So that answers the question we asked at the beginning about the placement of these laws here. And the idea is, in this sort of multi-step process of God's returned presence and our reconnection with it, the Mishkan is God's, special place of dwelling. But to continue to be open to, or to feel, or to be eligible to feel God's godly presence in the world, which is returned through the vehicle of the Mishkan and now more accessible and available, we have to condition our spirits through our bodies to an open state, and that has to do with eating the right things and not eating the wrong things. Finally, A number of commentaries propose what is perhaps the most basic rationale for all the laws of permitted and prohibited foodstuffs. The foods banned by the Torah, they maintain, are not prohibited because of specific characteristics in the substances themselves. Instead, God commands these regulations because God knows that the very act of selective abstinence in the area of sustenance will benefit the Israelites in manifold ways. According to these scholars, the laws of permitted and prohibited foodstuffs are designed to 1. Help maintain a clear separation between the Jewish people and surrounding cultures. 2. Train each Jew towards a disciplined lifestyle marked by the acceptance of God's will. 3. Connect the ordinary act of eating to Jewish law, thereby injecting God awareness into the daily life of each Jew. 4. Cultivate the people's recognition of their own powers of self-control. From the perspective of these scholars, the regulations of permitted and prohibited foodstuffs help maintain an essential equilibrium within the life of each Jew. And again, this sort of avoids to some degree the question of why this food and not that one, or this animal and not that one, unless you want to try to argue that those particular ones, will refraining from certain things will maintain the separation between the Jewish people and surrounding cultures, or things that we particularly desire are prohibited to help us train towards a disciplined lifestyle. But it seems like a wider range of this doesn't as much address the question of why these permitted or prohibited things, but just the institution of restrictions on eating set these, achieve these goals. As we've consistently noted, the Torah preaches that our physical surroundings are a divine gift to be appreciated and enjoyed. Man's embrace of the material world, however, must be balanced by a sense of limits, humility, and personal perspective. To live a sanctified life, we must always be in control of, rather than controlled by, our passions. Through continued abstinence from those foods prohibited by the Torah, the Jew learns to control his own desires by bending them to God's will. Finally, when all is said and done, the Torah's silence concerning many of the laws of kashrut leaves these regulations squarely in the realm of chukim. We may never fully understand, for example, why a deer is kosher while a horse is not, why shellfish are forbidden, yet turkeys allowed. As the above study demonstrates, many scholars find the struggle to comprehend these and other mysterious edicts of the Torah worthwhile, potentially yielding insights that can enrich our observance of the law. Success or failure in our search for meaning, however, can have no ultimate bearing on our observance of the law. Spoken like a good Orthodox rabbi, the revelation of God's will in the Torah is, in and of itself, enough to command the observant Jew's obedience, even when God's ultimate purposes remain unknown, right? That's the caveat you have to give after you say, let's venture into an exploration of the reasons. Come back and say, whether any of these convinced you or not, the law is equally binding. It's curious to me why he did not delve more into the predator approach, which is the one that it was always most familiar and compelling to me. Um, but we'll leave that there and wrap up with the points to ponder and then open it up for thoughts or reactions. This is a short one. Sometimes it's simply a matter of perspective. With a short, incisive observation, the Khatam Sofer offers an approach to the laws of permitted and prohibited foodstuffs that turns things around 180 degrees. The novel idea raised by the text, the Khatam Sofer suggests, is not what is forbidden to us, but rather what is permitted. This section of law opens with the statement, "These are the creatures which you shall eat," and then continues with a list of foods that are allowed for consumption. With these passages, the Torah informs us that God grants us permission to eat permitted foods. Without this divine authorization, apparently, even these foods would not be allowed. The Torah thus reminds us that man acquires the right to benefit from the world only through God's acquiescence. This is connected also to the Talmudic general, or one of the Talmudic approaches to brachot, that brachot need to be said because we're not allowed to derive benefit from anything in this world without acknowledging where it comes from. And so this is a similar framing to the whole way we think about kashrut. We don't focus on what we're not allowed to eat. We focus on what we are allowed to eat, and we recognize that the fact of being allowed to eat anything is itself a gift because it doesn't belong to us. initially. In our age of entitlement, we would do well to consider the Khatam Sofer's perspective. Man should not begin with the assumption that the world is fundamentally his and that God then sets limitations. The opposite is true. The world is a gift from God. Man is entitled only to that which God allows. So again, it resonates as meaningful, at least to me, from the perspective, although this is not a big temptation for me, but you can walk down the street and see many, many non-kosher restaurants and be beset by the sense of there's more that we can't eat than we can eat, and focus on the negative. And I think this is an attempt to turn it around and say, the very fact that food is permitted to us and that food is given to us as a gift, is in and of itself, a remarkable thing for which we have gratitude, and that's worth focusing on more than the question of what we can't eat. So that is his point to ponder at the end. Welcome any reactions, comments, or personal statements about attitudes towards kashrut, or theories about the laws of kashrut. Any and all are welcome.
I understand what you're saying about gratitude, but the word entitlement sounds too strong. Like, what are we supposed to do? Not eat?
Right, right. Yeah.
Like, God made the world and our bodies to function
Yes.
in a way that we have to consume, whether that's plants
Yes.
or animals.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
We are dependent on something outside of our bodies
Yes.
to stay
Right.
alive.
Right. God made us dependent, and therefore, the sense that we are entitled to food to eat doesn't feel entitled, just feels sort of definitionally true. Um,
Right.
yes. Yes. Yeah. No, it definitely sounds a little bit like, yeah, an overextension to make a cultural point, right? Maybe that's why it's in quotes, right? It says in quotes, in our age of entitlement, not that feeling that we are, you know, permitted to eat is an entitled attitude, but that we walk through the world broadly with too much entitlement. And so, as we turn our attention to food, we focus on the gratitude more than on the negative. But yes, I think I don't disagree with your comment at all. Yeah. Other thoughts as we head into a time period in which we have even more restricted eating of all kinds, and which has some symbolic meaning and is not always easy to hold on to for 8 days. Um, we can certainly leave it here, and really wish everybody a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Looking forward to having my parents with us, and hoping to see all who are able to be in shul, and to those far and wide. A Chag Kasher v'Sameach. We won't meet next Monday night, which is Chol Hamoed, and we'll be continuing on with Parshat Shmini anyways that week. But in 2 weeks' time, we should be back. Let's just double check that. The 13th looks good so far. So great to see everybody. Love to mom and dad. Chag Kasher v'Sameach to all. Laila Tov.
Thank you.